What happens when justice becomes a form of torture? Today, we dive into a shocking case that exposes the inhumane practice of solitary confinement for death row inmates. Recent rulings are challenging this controversial system, and the revelations are nothing short of disturbing. Prepare yourselves for a journey into the dark corners of our prison system, where isolation becomes a sentence worse than death itself. Imagine being locked in a small room, barely larger than a parking space, for 22 hours a day, with little to no human contact. This is the reality for many death row inmates across America. The effects of such prolonged isolation are devastating, especially for those with pre-existing mental health conditions. Scientists and experts unanimously agree that indefinite or prolonged solitary confinement causes serious harm. It can lead to severe psychological distress, cognitive impairment, and even physical health problems. For those already struggling with mental illness, the consequences can be catastrophic. The United Nations has taken a strong stance on this issue, declaring that solitary confinement amounts to torture. Yet, as of 2020, a dozen states in the U.S. routinely kept death-sentenced prisoners in these extreme conditions for years on end. It's a practice that raises serious questions about human rights and the ethical treatment of prisoners in our justice system. Now let's turn our attention to a case that's been making waves in Tennessee. Christa Pike, the only woman on the state's death row, has spent an astonishing 28 years in what amounts to functional solitary confinement. Imagine being trapped in a cell the size of a parking space for nearly 3 decades with almost no human contact. Pike's situation was unique and particularly harsh. While male death row inmates in Tennessee were allowed to socialize and work together, Pike was denied these basic opportunities for human interaction. She had no access to educational or religious programming, and virtually no physical contact with another human being. But there's been a significant development in Pike's case. Just this week, she reached a settlement with the state that will dramatically change her living conditions. The agreement will allow her to work and socialize with other women in the general prison population. This means shared meals, more time out of her cell, and the chance for meaningful human interaction after years of isolation. Pike's attorney called this settlement life-changing, emphasizing the devastating impact that prolonged solitary confinement has had on her client's mental and physical health. This case shines a spotlight on the controversial practice of solitary confinement and raises important questions about human rights in our prison system. Now let's turn our attention to Pennsylvania, where a groundbreaking legal battle has unfolded. Roy Williams, a prisoner with a lifelong history of serious mental illness, took on the state's Department of Corrections in a lawsuit that's sending shockwaves through the justice system. Williams alleged that he was subjected to 26 years of solitary confinement, a practice that experts say can cause severe psychological damage even in healthy individuals. For someone with pre-existing mental health conditions, the effects can be catastrophic. Initially, a federal district court dismissed Williams's claims, but in a stunning turn of events, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals overturned that decision. They ruled that Williams's case could proceed, stating that individuals with known histories of serious mental illness have a clearly established right not to be subjected to prolonged, indefinite solitary confinement without justification. This ruling is a significant blow to Pennsylvania's controversial solitary confinement policies and could pave the way for similar cases across the country. Now, let's delve into the shocking details of Pennsylvania's solitary confinement practices. In 2014, a U.S. Department of Justice investigation unveiled a horrifying reality for death row inmates in the state. These prisoners were confined to tiny 7 by 12-foot cells around the clock, deprived of basic human necessities. They were barred from educational courses, vocational opportunities, and even group religious services. The conditions were nothing short of inhumane. Imagine living in a cell with no natural light, artificial lights blazing 24/7, and poor ventilation that left the air thick with the stench of human waste. But it gets worse. Officials punished mentally ill prisoners who exhibited symptoms of their conditions in the most cruel ways imaginable. They'd deny them running water and bedding, strip them of their clothes, and even place them in full-body restraints for over 7 hours at a time. The DOJ's conclusion was damning. Pennsylvania's use of solitary confinement for people with serious mental illness violated both the 8th Amendment and the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was a system designed to break the human spirit, with little regard for the devastating consequences on the inmate's mental health. Let's take a closer look at the cases of Christa Pike and Roy Williams. Both of these individuals suffer from organic brain damage and psychiatric disorders, making them especially vulnerable to the devastating effects of solitary confinement. Christa Pike's story is particularly heartbreaking. Exposed to alcohol in the womb, her brain development was compromised from the start. Her childhood was marred by abuse, neglect, and multiple violent rapes, leading to severe mental illness. These early traumas left her ill-equipped to cope with the extreme isolation of solitary confinement. Roy Williams' case is equally disturbing. He had already battled serious mental illness for half his life before entering Pennsylvania's custody. Once on death row, the crushing weight of isolation proved too much, and he attempted suicide. Experts agree that individuals with pre-existing mental health conditions are at a significantly higher risk of deterioration when subjected to prolonged solitary confinement. The lack of human contact, sensory deprivation, and constant isolation can exacerbate their symptoms, potentially leading to irreversible psychological damage. These cases highlight the urgent need for reform in our prison systems, especially when it comes to the treatment of mentally ill inmates on death row. As we wrap up today's episode, let's reflect on the changing landscape of solitary confinement practices in our prison system. We've seen how recent rulings for Christa Pike and Roy Williams have challenged the status quo, recognizing the severe harm caused by prolonged isolation, especially for those with pre-existing mental health conditions. These cases shine a light on a dark corner of our justice system, forcing us to confront the ethical implications of such practices. As society evolves, so too must our approach to incarceration and rehabilitation. What are your thoughts on this issue? Do you think these rulings will lead to widespread changes in how we treat death row inmates? Share your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into true crime stories that challenge our perceptions of justice.